So my presentation today will be on the legal culture during emergencies, and I will draw examples from the past. I will combine it with the present situation, and then let's see if we can, if we will be able to foresee the future and future reactions to emergencies. In order to do that, my presentation will be divided into two parts. I will first present the issue of emergencies, the main features, the whole climate, the social aspects, but also I will focus on the reaction of each institution, and then I will discuss and I will present different types of incarceration, because incarcerations are widely known as policies to face emergency and crisis. So I will briefly examine the framework, and I will draw similarities and differences between different types of incarceration. So emergencies. When we talk about emergencies, we have three main elements. Emergencies are extraordinary conditions. There is the feeling of urgency, and they are by default temporary. And what I mean with extraordinary, I mean that the constitutional law and the way Congress works and the president, more or less about our ordinary life. Wars, typhoons, social unrest, siege are not ordinary issues. They are not part of our life. So, and what they do, they threat our normality. They threat our day-to-day life. So that is the first element. The second element is that we don't have the time to respond according to with the ordinary procedures. If we can foresee that an incident will take place after a year, we will be able to find the appropriate mechanism to organize a draft policy, to organize a discussion on the topic and find a solution. But this is not the case during emergencies. In emergencies, there is urgency. We need to react now, not tomorrow. Finally, there is the element of reversible conditions. If we have some extreme conditions, and these extreme conditions are permanent, they are to stay, then it's not an emergency with a sense that it's a new normality. It's our new life, and we need to accept that and then adjust. So these are the elements of emergencies. And now I will focus on the impact of emergencies. Socially, there's panic. Most of you, I see that in the audience, we have young people. Most of you, you were in the US when the September 11th incident took place. There was a feeling of insecurity. And this is the first reaction of the society. It's panic. Then there is another reaction, which is that moderate solutions are unpopular. And this is something that we need to accept and examine. Moderate solutions are unpopular. This is something that I realized that I lived in Greece when we had the emergency with the bankruptcy of the country, where moderate solutions were unpopular. People were thirsty for radical solutions. And this is the second element that we keep. The legal implications, about the legal implications, we have different models of reaction. We might have a special configuration, so the constitutional drafters might have there might be a provision within the Constitution that will allocate authority during the state of emergency, in particular to the executive. There are several reasons for that, for instance, expertise. But then we might have a legislative delegation, ad hoc. The legislative body, a Congress or the Parliament, they might delegate a specific authority to the executive in order to regulate the topic with a specific framework. What I consider the most problematic aspect of emergencies is what I call the restatement. The restatement with a sense of the capacity of the institutional reaction. So it is true that when we have the climate of panic, the officials and the executive, they want to respond promptly because they want to show that everything is under control, that we have an action, we have an emergency, and this is our reaction, and everything's under control, so calm. So this is the reaction of the executive. At the same time, we said that moderate decisions, moderate solutions are unpopular. And these drive legislators to adopt radical solutions. So in Europe, we had the immigration crisis. We know that Chancellor Merkel adopted a policy which was immigrant-friendly, but then people were not happy with that. And she paid the price with the elections of 2 weeks ago. Finally, the courts. Although we claim that the courts, they should be, that the judiciary and justice shall be blind, the reality is that justices are human beings. They live within the society, they hear the society, and they are influenced by such environment. So what we expect that during emergencies, the judiciary will show self-restraint, and they will trust the political branches of the government. So with these lenses, we can understand we can not understand, but we can justify, we can rationalize the Korematsu case. So having said that, different types of emergencies, they trigger different mechanisms, different policies. There are 3 models of reaction. In theory, we have the business as usual model, we have the accommodation model, and we have the extra-legal model. So with the business as usual model, we expect that the legal order will have some, in each armory, will have some emergency policies already adopted. It will have an emergency configuration within the separation of power system, and they will react without extra measures. The accommodation model is a model according to which the legislators will adapt the legal framework to the exigency. And then with the extra-legal model, officials, the executive, will adopt some extreme measures, and then the judiciary will evaluate them. Although these are the models in theory, in reality, we see that policymakers, they pick and choose. So it is true that in every legal order, we have temporary emergency measures that they are adopted, and they are tailored to the exigency. But at the same time, we have permanent emergency mechanism. And what I mean permanent mechanism, in order to exemplify, I have this picture here with a first aid kit. In every house, in every car, we have a first aid kit. And this is a permanent emergency mechanism that we have. Obviously, we don't have a hospital in our house. This is for other types of emergencies. But the first aid kit is a permanent emergency mechanism. So I classified the incarceration types, incarceration models, according to their distinction between permanent and temporary. So I will present briefly three types: the prisoners of war, the internment, and the displaced persons camps. These are permanent policies because they are part of our legal framework, and in case we have an emergency that will trigger, then we implement them. So the prisoners of war is camp policy, is a policy that we see in the first Geneva Convention after World War I. And in Article 9, we see the legal framework, and we see that in that regulatory framework, we can see what policymakers can do and what are the rights and for the prisoners of war. The second case is the case with internment. The internment is about enemy aliens. That policy was not regulated during World War II. So when we had the case with the American-Japanese or Japanese-American camps, the internment was part of the international customary law. And in particular, USA and Japan, they mutually agreed to extend the prisoners of war provision to enemy aliens. Later on, with the Geneva Convention 4, this policy was codified. And we have several examples during World War II. We had internment camps in Britain. We had internment camps here in the US. We had in Japan. We had also, for instance, I have here a map of the internment camp in Stanley in Hong Kong. So when Japan invaded, all European citizens, they were put in a infrastructure in Stanley. About the displaced persons camp, these are also known as refugee or immigration camps. Almost every country has a regulatory framework. So I added here a picture from a refugee camp in Palestine. And I have included the other picture, the more modern, is about a recent, we call them hotspot. It's a better name. We call them hotspot. It's a immigration or refugee camp in Greece. And it was built according to the EU directive. So these are the displaced person camps. And the aim for these camps is to concentrate the people way to clarify their status, whether they are immigrants or refugees, and if they are immigrants, they will be deported. Whether they are refugees, they will stay and they will have some privileges. I will conclude with the temporary concentration camps, and the first one, it's what we all know with concentration camps. I tried to find a specific regulatory framework for them. There is no. Probably it's because concentration camps were used by liberal states. The first one is that we know is the Nazi regime, and I have some pictures here. I found some very, very ugly pictures, but I didn't want to use them. But right now, when we use the term concentration camp, in our mind, the connotation is about death camps. So for them, for the people in the concentration camp, it's a punishment, and they are forced for labor, and the survival rate in the Nazi concentration camps was 50%. We had also kind of concentration camps in Russia, the so-called Gulag. Again, we had the same conditions, the same harsh conditions. The life expectancy rate was 90%. And then I will conclude with the final case. I call them the no-name case. And I have two cases. One is from the past, our case, the American-Japanese or Japanese-American incarceration camps, and Guantanamo. And this is our present. We use the term internment ex post facto because I try to find, the term internment in legal document, and it's obvious that the name internment, the label internment, was popularized after the 70s, and it was used in legal documents. But internment is about enemy aliens, and I think that this is something that the community has to take into consideration. It's not about citizens. So I cannot classify that to the existing categories. I just need to stress that I found these internment camps that included also citizens in Canada and in Australia. So the US paradigm has also some other cases. And I will finish here with the justification for this camp. The justification is that the end justifies the means. And there are people who believe and who argue that ex post, we can criticize the policy, but at that time of insecurity, where we didn't know how the situation will end, it was a policy adopted. So we need to focus on that. We need to focus on that. Because the Guantanamo case, it's a case that we know, it's a black hole, it's a legal black hole, comes to confirm the words of Justice Brennan, that every time we have a crisis, the response is an unnecessary infringement of liberties, and every time we repeat the same mistake. And what we need to do, we need to draft a rule book. When there is social pressure, the executive and the official shall ask themselves, is it the appropriate mechanism? Is there a better mechanism, better policy to address the problem without having the same impact on the lives of these people? So thank you very much. I hope that I added the legal dimension to the whole problem. Thank you.